Hey everyone, today on the Plastic Canvas I'm going to show you how I paint a red cape or cloak. Hey everyone, Matt here from the Plastic Canvas and welcome to today's painting video. And like I said in the intro, today I'm going to show you how I paint a red cape or cloak, and for that I'm going to use the Witch from Oathsworn. So with red, the main thing that I think you need to get right is lots of contrast. Red isn't a colour that you can go really light with when highlighting because it will go too far into either pink or orange. So to make sure you can get that contrast while still keeping your highlights red, we need to start with a really dark base coat. Now this will dry much darker than it looks now, but I originally base coated with clotted red. This is one of my darkest reds. But after it dried, I didn't actually think that it was dark enough. So as you can see, I decided to do a second layer with bloodstained red. This is the darkest red that I have. This ended up being a good idea because it did dry darker, which ends up giving deeper shadows. So for the first layer of the highlighting, I've gone to clotted red. This is the one that I used as the first base coat colour, but I've gone to it to start the highlighting because it's a bit lighter than bloodstained red without being too saturated. And all I'm doing here is laying it down everywhere, except for where I want the shadows to be their darkest, like just underneath this fold in the robe. And then to get a smooth blend from this layer to the base coat, I just cleaned off the bristles, left them a little damp, and then feathered out the edge, which you can see me doing now. This just gradually thins the edge out so that the base coat underneath can gradually show through. And now for the next layer, I'm still using clotted red, but I've started to mix in some heraldic red. In terms of brightness, heraldic red sits right in the middle of my collection, but it's got some good saturation to it, so this layer will start to have some impact. It looks like it's a big jump in terms of brightness, but acrylic paints always dry darker than how they look when they're wet. And I'm painting this layer in the exact same way as the last layer, except I'm not going as close to the shadows as what I did with the last one. So I start by laying it down where the highlights will end up being their brightest, work towards the shadows, but stop short of where I did for the previous layer. Then again, I clean off the bristles, leave them a bit damp, and feather out the edge. Now we're on to the next layer of the highlighting, and you can see that I've dropped the clotted red and we're now just using straight heraldic red. This is really going to start to add some intensity to the colouring of the robe and to build that contrast between the deeper shadows and the highlights. There's nothing different about this layer to any of the previous ones. I start by laying the paint down where the highlights will end up their brightest, work towards the shadows, but stop even further short of them than the previous layer. And then with the damp bristles, feather out the edges. By always stopping short of the previous layer and feathering out the edge, you make sure that all of the different tones that you're using can still show through, and that helps you get nice smooth blends. And now for the final layer of the highlighting, we're going to give the contrast one last boost by mixing some explosion orange into the heraldic red. This layer by far covers the smallest amount of area. It's just going where I want the highlights to be their brightest. So right out on the edges of the folds, the very tops of her shoulders, and just on the top of her head, those sorts of areas. It's important to not overdo this layer because you still want the robe or cape to look red. This layer is just to get that little bit more contrast between the shadows and the highlights. And so just as I do the last few bits of this layer, that's how I paint a red cape or cloak. I really appreciate you taking the time to check out another one of my videos, and as always, I really hope you've gotten something out of it that you can take away and use in your own painting. But that's going to do us for today, so until next time, this is Matt from the Plastic Canvas, signing out. Happy painting everyone, cheers.